Привет! So, who would win the next Ukrainian presidential elections when they eventually take place? Currently, under Ukrainian law, because of the Russo-Ukrainian war, it is not possible to hold elections. But at some stage, this war will end and presumably Ukraine will still be a state. So let's look at the opinion polls right now, near the end of November 2024, and see what is most likely to happen. Of course, recently we've seen opinion polls in the US elections, also in Romanian elections, which weren't very accurate, but this is the available data that we have. There's been an opinion poll in Ukraine. And hello, my name is Connor Klein. I am an expert in international relations. I have a background in this region affected by the Russo-Ukrainian war at a high academic institution in the US, and I've been living in Ukraine for many years before the 2022 invasion. Was actually also there in the 2014 invasion time as well, also for the Euromaidan revolution, and I speak Ukrainian and Russian, so I can give you a more nuanced and informed and unique analysis of the happenings of the Russo-Ukrainian war. So let's just look at these opinion polls, and number one is not the current president, Volodymyr Zelensky. It is actually Valery Zaluzhny, and he garnered 27% of preferences in this opinion poll that was conducted by the Social Monitoring Center between November 15th and November 21st, 2024. And it's the first assessment, it says here in this article, of voter preferences since Russia's extended invasion in February 2022. So Valery Zaluzhny is the current Ukrainian ambassador to the United Kingdom. However, beforehand, he was the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces. And then he resigned and became the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Kingdom. And in second place is the current president, Volodymyr Zelensky, 16%. And after that, we've got the former president, the president who was in power before Zelensky, that is Petro Poroshenko. He is with 7%. And then I'll just throw in one other figure because I think he's quite relevant. Kirill Budanov, who is the head of Ukraine's military intelligence, he was in fourth place with 6%. They then asked for the combined support for candidates, asking who their second preference was. And if you combine the two, then Zaluzhny would have 42% of the preferences, and Zelensky would have 22, Budanov would have 18, and Poroshenko would just have 10. So that gives you a little bit more about the strength of potential voters' preferences in Ukraine. So what does this tell us? It tells us that there's a strong possibility if Valery Zaluzhny were to run for president in Ukraine that he would seem to be the bookies' favorite against Volodymyr Zelensky. And we should think about this in terms of if there were some sort of deal to end the hostilities in Ukraine, it may be some sort of compromise deal. It's been mooted. Obviously, we don't know yet. Donald Trump, who won the US presidential election, will be inaugurated in the second half of January 2025. And he said he can solve the conflict one day. That's probably hyperbole. He probably doesn't plan to do that. But he may have some sort of peace deal in mind. And would that be palatable not just to the Ukrainian public, to the Ukrainian president, Zelensky, but maybe it would also have to be palatable to Zaluzhny, because if he were likely to win the next Ukrainian presidential elections, then presumably they would take place shortly after some sort of cessation of hostilities, maybe even before a peace deal were signed. And what platform would he run on? I find it extremely unlikely that a former head of the Ukrainian armed forces is going to be in favor of ceding some sort of territory de jure. So maybe that might be Crimea, maybe it might be more than that. It might be parts of Donbass, it might be Kherson Oblast, Zaporizhzhia Oblast, or maybe more. Who knows what might be in any sort of deal. And that probably complicates things even further, the fact that Zelensky is not coming up as number one in the polls, because you can imagine that if in some scenarios Zelensky signed some deal and Zaluzhny didn't agree with it, and then he ran on that campaign and he's the ahead in the polls. And I know just from living in Ukraine that he is very well respected in general in the country. That perhaps if he were to get in power afterwards, would he concur with the fact that they had signed this peace deal, whether it involves giving up territory or something else. And I could counter argue, well, it's already signed, it's under international law, it's all legal. But Russia, and even when Vladimir Putin became president of Russia, they multiple times agreed with Ukraine's sovereignty and where its borders were, and Crimea being part of Ukraine, but then they just ignored it and invaded anyways in 2014 and 2022. So with that precedent, if something were signed and then Zelensky came in, it would complicate things further if he were against it. So I think what we can say now is, well, there isn't an election looming in Ukraine. It is not possible under Ukrainian law right now. It may be possible if there were cessation of hostilities, presumably. However, it would seem to complicate any sort of deal to arrive at that if the current president might not be the next president of Ukraine, as is kind of indicated by these polls. But again, Zelensky isn't officially running, and we don't know if the polls are really that accurate as we see it seen in the US. They weren't, I mean, it is a big lead in this poll, but still, I wouldn't be betting my house on opinion polls. Nowadays, they seem to be becoming less and less helpful in predicting the outcome of election. However, it does seem to indicate that his opinion would have some sort of relevance in the case that Ukraine were potentially going to sign some deal. That's the way I interpret this. And who knows, that can also change when politicians start running. Maybe Zelensky wouldn't run, maybe Zelensky wouldn't run, maybe we just don't know who would be in such a field. So I'll leave that video at that for today. I just found it interesting to see those opinion polls, the only data that we seem to have in the last few years since the invasion of Ukraine in terms of public support. It is obviously pretty difficult to get in a country at a time of war, again complicating how accurate it might or not be as indication. However, having been on the ground in Ukraine, it is something that I hear quite a lot, quite a common refrain, is the popularity of Valery Zaluzhny, the former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, or the leader of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and the current Ukrainian ambassador to the United Kingdom. So I'll leave it at that. Do побачення. See you in the next video.